Yes, good. Good to see so many of you here. My name is Sofia Östmark, and I'm the Secretary General of the organization Union to Union since about 1.5 months back, so very new on the job. Before that, I worked on the Global Deal, which we'll come back to. I'm really happy that we have such a distinguished panel here today, representatives of companies, countries, and unions to talk about social dialogue and how that is a win for workers, a win for employers, and also a win for government as a whole. So we will have today Ambassador Santiago Wins, who is the ambassador of Uruguay to Sweden. We also have Jean-Christophe Sciberras, who is the head of industrial relation at the Belgian company Solvay, and also coordinating the French platform for the Global Deal. And we have Sofia Vahlne from Scania and Lars-Åke Bergkvist from H&M. And we also have Jonas Nordling, who is the vice chair of the board of Union to Union, as well as the president of the Swedish Union of Journalists. So we will have the conversation here today with the panelists and asking questions and answers to them. And then towards the end, we will also open up for questions from the audience. This meeting will also be live streamed at Union to Union's webpage, which is www.uniontounion.org/live. So if you want to use that when you Twitter or anything like that, or share with colleagues in afterhand, you're welcome to do that as well. So maybe just a few words of introduction. You are all probably know what social dialogue is, so we don't have to introduce the subject. But that is really all kinds of exchanges of experience between representatives of unions and representatives of employers. It can be tripartite on a national level, but also bipartite and as well as at the company level. So there are different forms of social dialogue which we are referring to and discussing here today. The Global Deal, which many of you probably know, is an international global multi-stakeholder partnership that was originally initiated by the Swedish Prime Minister, Stefan Löfven. It is now a partnership with around 100 partners, and France is one of the partners where you also have a lot of French companies that are engaged with this. And this partnership is really focusing on the potential of social dialogue and to bring social dialogue up on the agenda, on the international agenda and national agenda in many cases. So this will be more or less the starting point that we have today. One aspect of this is how can we use social dialogue as a tool for development, especially in low-income countries or emerging economies, and how can we use that to its full potential. So that is something that we will take the starting point in today in the discussion. So I will begin with Ambassador Wins. Uruguay is a country, as many of you probably know, where they have a lot of experience with social dialogue and how that has been helpful in the developments of the country. So please, Ambassador, could you tell us how you have seen in Uruguay that social dialogue has been a tool for you, and maybe some concrete examples on how you have used social dialogue in Uruguay?
Okay, good morning, and thank you, Sofia, very much for the invitation. It's a really pleasure to be here. I don't know how much all of you know about Uruguay, because we're not on the news very much. So I thought that I can give you shortly 4 or 5 facts so you get an idea of what we're talking about. First, it's a small country in South America. It's 3.4 million people. It's a country which is considered by the World Bank a high income per capita country. This is an advantage and a disadvantage, and I will basically tell you why. An advantage is because it means that the economy has been growing well over the last years, but the challenge is that when you pass by $1 or $2 an average figure, doesn't mean that all your problems have suddenly disappeared, and all the achievements that you have made in the social field can be jeopardized. Because of this. You are no longer eligible for any financial assistance. And then it's considered a full democracy by the Economist Index in the world. Is ranked 19 in the world in terms of democracy, and is one of the lowest corrupt countries in the world, which is I think it's always important to say, because people, when think of Latin America, think immediately about corruption. Uruguay ranks 21st in the Transparency International world ranking. And regarding social dialogue, we have a long history. Work unions started in Uruguay late 19th century. And just to give you an example of the many legal characteristics of the country, the limit of 8 hours work journey in Uruguay has 100 years old. So this is not something new. It's something that has been progressing over the years. And we have an interesting characteristic also with Sweden. We are two countries that have the collective bargaining coverage is about 95%. But so I think with this I can give you a little picture of my country. But this doesn't mean that all the challenges are solved. On the contrary, yesterday, and I'm just a diplomat, and I'm no expert on these issues, so I was very honored when Sofia invited me, and was, of course, doing a little bit of reading on what message should I convey. And one of the things is I got on as an impression on personal view is that even if there is a common definition on social dialogue agreed by ILO, for example, I think that each country has a different understanding that is influenced by its history, by its politics, and by its economy. And social dialogue in Uruguay has traditionally focused a lot on salary negotiations, but we haven't fully exploited the potential of social dialogue for the benefit of the growing of the economy. And one last important thing is that we have had these wage negotiations since 1943, but it's very much affected on how the economy is going. During good economic periods of economic growth, salary tend to increase. Salary negotiations tend to increase and adapt to the current situation. But in terms of that the situation is not so good, there's always a risk of losing these achievements, and that's why this is very focused on the salary negotiations, and is still, I think, the potential for exchanging experiences is learning on how to use social dialogue for creating a very economic environment in the country. So I will leave it because one to be short.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I know, would you like to say something also, because there are great examples from Uruguay where you also have used social dialogue to organize workers in the informal sector. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, as I said first, the social dialogue and the worker unions, in fact, they were organized in a different economic scenario. When the workers' union started, the economy had a lot of presence of the industrial sector. But now the economy is has a more relevant role, for example, on services. And services are not, the service sector rules are not that clear as in the industrial sector, and that is another challenge that we have. For example, tourism only represents 10% of Uruguay's GDP. I said that our population is 3.4 million people. We will receive 4 million tourists a year, and mostly between December and March. You should be going there because it's winter here, it's summer there, by the way. But it's been very considered. These wage negotiations have been very organized in the industrial sector, for example, in the beef industry since 1943, 1945. But since 2005, these are mandatory. The government has the obligation to call for tripartite negotiations: government, enterprise, and workers. And for example, this year we are in the process of having the biggest tripartite negotiation for salary agreements that has already in 4 months reached agreement over more than 55% of the workers. And another thing that this, as achievements, I could say, this has established a minimum wage for all workers. We have in recent years, there were 2 sectors that were not covered that are very important in the economy. The economy is agro-based economy. So the rural workers were not covered by the 8 hours work a day. Now they are. And also in Latin America is very usual. Here is not that you have some help at home, some housekeepers. They were not also included in the social security system. Now they are. Another achievement that has been very important is we have always had, because it's been always a middle-class country. In fact, in 1920s, Uruguay was known as the Switzerland of America. I don't know where this idea came from, but it sounds good. It's not the case today because the economy in the 70s, 80s, and 90s deteriorated. Now it's recovering. Now we're in a phase of 15 years of economic growth. And this has, for example, made possible that we have universal healthcare coverage for everyone, free. Education has always been free for everyone, including university. And this also means that despite there is a small population, there is a highly qualified, educated people. The challenge we have nowadays is that, and this is something maybe we'll address later, and the curricula is not made for the jobs of the future. It's an old-fashioned curricula. But these are some examples of what social dialogue and these negotiations had meant in terms of rights for workers in Uruguay.
That's very interesting to hear also for us as a Swedish audience who other countries on the other side of the world has worked on social dialogue in some ways also similar to how we have used it here in Sweden. And also good that you did some advertising from Uruguay. I heard it's a very nice place. I've never been.
It's my work.
Yeah, exactly. You have to take the advantage. So it was very smart of you. And so we're now going over to Jean-Christophe, who is working for the Belgian company Solvay, but is based in Paris, in France, and is also coordinating what is a French platform for a Global Deal. And that platform gathers different French companies, the trade unions, and the government to discuss social dialogue issues, basically. But Jean-Christophe, can you tell me a little bit? Solvay is a very well-known Belgian company, but maybe not so known in Sweden, unfortunately. So maybe you can tell us a little bit where your company operates, and also how you see that social dialogue is beneficial from your company perspective. Why is it important to work with this issue, and how do you work with it in your company?
Okay, so thank you, Sofia, for inviting me to this panel. I'm not sure I will be as good as our colleague from Uruguay to be attractive for Solvay. But in a nutshell, Solvay is a chemical company. It was founded in Belgium in 1863. It's a very well-known company in Belgium, and it's still largely owned by the families who founded this company. We are 27,000 people in the world, 150 plants. We make chemical. The first customer is Boeing, the second one is Apple, the third one is Saint-Gobain for the glass, and so on. So we are a little bit everywhere like the chemical companies. And I'm in charge of industrial relations for this company. So thanks to Sofia, we have been involved in the Global Deal initiative very early through the French government. I will come on that in a minute. But before that, just what is our vision and of social dialogue is very clear. We do social dialogue because it's good for the business. That's the main reason we do that. We believe that involving employees and their representative in the decision of the company is key, especially today, especially in the more modern world, because people are motivated to participate. And if we don't involve people, the company at some point will have difficulties. So we have developed what I call a kind of system of social dialogue, and we have we manage this company with 3 channels to work. We have the management, we have the communication line, and we have the social dialogue line. And we want to make this work all together. Each channel is useful, and we organize this all together at the same speed with synchronicity. The base for us is we want to tackle the issue inside the company. We want to manage that with our people, because the risk in especially the global company, if you don't manage the issue within the company, they will be managed by some other people outside of the company. And we prefer to behave with our people as adults rather than being fighting against external people who don't necessarily know what we are doing. So we have organized 4 levels of discussion. We have the global level. We have created a global forum with 8 employee representatives coming from the main countries of the company for Europe and for rest of the world. And we not only discuss a strategy with the top management to get the input, but also we have developed a set of agreements. So we have negotiated agreements at the global level. So we have 2 important agreements that we've done in the recent year. First, we have a profit sharing program. So if we meet some objective in terms of financial objective and sustainable development objective, then a budget which has been discussed will be distributed to all the employees of the company. This is what we call the Global Performance Sharing Plan. And the second agreement, more recent, last year, we decided that all over the world, all the employees should have the same basic social rights. So we have 14 weeks maternity leave all over the world, paternity leave. We have created a package, 2 years package in case of somebody dies. We have a minimum standard in all the countries for all the employees in terms of health, so that the coverage reach a certain level, and also in case of incapacity of people who are becoming disabled. So we negotiate this with the Global Forum so that it's applicable now. It will be applicable because it took us 2 years to roll out in April 2019. So it's basic rights, common, all the same for all the employees of our company. We are present in 58 countries. And you can imagine that in some countries, just to take an example, this has doubled suddenly the duration of the maternity leave, with, of course, full salary during the maternity leave. Just to give you an example, we don't do that. We think it's good for the sense of belonging to the organization, but it's also part of our policy to attract people and to retain people. It's very important, and it's not only important in emerging countries. Sometimes it's very new. For instance, in the US, the woman thought it was very new to have this protection of maternity, and it's very important in a labor market which is very tense, like today in the US. We have the European level, very strong also, much longer, much experience, of course, 25 years with the European Works Council. I cannot detail, but it's a very strong level of discussion, especially in terms of restructuring and change. That's a key place when we have merger and acquisition, divestment, sometimes reorganization of the company. The EWC is really the key place to discuss. And to be clear, they have a lot of impact in terms of on the project, because we discuss in a consultation mode. So we say, okay, maybe this is our plan, but if you have, you may see some things that we don't see. So please tell us. So it has an input on the result. Then we have the country level. In some country, we have the created central works council, elected generally by the local works council, and this is important in some countries, not all, but in some countries it's very key, especially in Europe. And then, of course, the site level, where people are employed. This is where, of course, you can imagine that is the most important place for social dialogue and discussion.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting to hear what you as a big Belgian company is working on. I will come back to you in a second about the Global Deal-plattform and the French companies' engagements in the Global Deal. But I will turn now to the Swedish companies. We now heard the Belgian companies and why it's important for them also as a business case to work on social dialogue in their work. But Sofia from Scania, can you tell us a little bit on how Scania sees social dialogue in your operations, and also maybe how we can work together, unions, companies and governments, to enhance social dialogue?
Absolutely, and I would, of course, I hope many in the rooms know Scania since before. But I think many of us are used to Scania as the producer of heavy trucks and buses. But Scania is actually becoming something else, a part of a transport and logistics system. So we are changing very much and very fast. And the vision of Scania is to become the leader in the shift towards a sustainable transport system. And doing this, of course, it starts and ends with people, obviously. So, like Jean-Christophe said, it's working with social dialogue and capturing the skills of all our employees. That's not something we do to be good or to fulfill conventions or things like that. That's to be truly sustainably successful as a company. So for Scania, from a Swedish perspective, it's been quite natural and quite easy, I would say, to see the advantages of working together. We have many examples of where we are successful thanks to the cooperation that we have been having. But of course, it's a joint learning journey, I would say. I mean, Sweden is working in one way, and then we have business in 100 countries in the world. And obviously, contexts, cultures, and regulations are very different. So it's a learning journey where we are also building on a structure that we have, that we really want to have co-determination, consultation, getting to know the perspectives of all the colleagues through their employee representatives, but where we are also learning how are things working differently, and not so seldom better than in Sweden. So it's a very interesting work and very important. And I think with the changes in the political environment in the world today, I think I see that the global deal and working together in this three-partite platform is going to be even more important going forward.
That's good. You touched upon the fact that not in all countries you have the enabling environment to actually engage in social dialogue. How can you, Scania, as a company, work together in those 100 countries where you have operations to try to make sure that trade union rights are respected and that people has the right to organize in those countries?
Yeah. And again, this is work that we, to a high extent, do together, of course, with HR and management in all these countries, but also together with unions, both from a Swedish perspective and also locally. So the different work is, of course, has to be done differently, depending on the prerequisites in each country. But the structure that we have in Scania and that we are working to implement throughout the world obviously needs to come from the perspective that we need to work together to stay successful.
That's good to hear. H&M is another well-known company, which I don't think you have to explain to most of the audience here. But Lars-Åke, you have what is called a global framework agreement.
Yes, we do.
Can you tell us a little bit on how you work with this global framework agreement, what the global framework agreement is, and why you as a company has this kind of agreement?
Okay. Thank you very much, Sofia, for that. We concluded our global framework agreement with Industrial and IF Metal 3 years ago in November 2015. It's pretty much an agreement about, of course, about rights and obligations for both organizations, for H&M and for Industrial/IF Metal. I think we can say it's an operational agreement that we are also clearing out the division of work between us, and mainly it is about how we implement the agreement in the different production markets. And I can see two cores in the agreement. That is the right of freedom of association and the right of collective bargaining. And one of the tools I can say for that is that we have set up national monitoring committees in some of the production countries, which consists of equal representatives from H&M and from the affiliated unions of Industrial. And we have these committees up in Bangladesh, Cambodia, Indonesia, Myanmar, and Turkey. And of course, we have a dialogue between Stockholm and our production organization in Hong Kong and Geneva and IF Metal here in Stockholm. But as much as possible, we are trying to delegate the work out to the different production markets to empower the social partners. For H&M, we should work very closely with our suppliers to have an understanding about and the respect of international labor standards, freedom of association, and the right for collective bargaining, and the same for Industri och Metall to work with affiliated unions in different production markets so we can get them together to the negotiation table to negotiate wages, working condition, health and safety, whatever it could be, and hopefully also be able to facilitate peaceful conflict resolution and hopefully collective bargaining agreement. So that's how I see the GFA's core, so to speak.
Yeah, and the Global Framework Agreement is just, one of the tools that you use. You also work in a number of countries on how to, create and enhancing the legal framework, but also how you should do specifically. But why is H&M engaged in the Global Framework Agreements and social dialogue issues? Why is that important for you? And obviously you are also operating in a business where there is hard to make sure that the rights and the obligations are followed at the different national levels where you have your supply chain.
Yes, right. I mean, we have our retail operation now in 68 countries globally. Uruguay was, I think, the latest country where we opened up our shops. And we are working with approximately 800 suppliers globally, representing about 2,000 factories. And as you probably already know, we are in countries like Bangladesh, Cambodia, Myanmar, Indonesia, China, India, and so forth. And we are not the owners of the factories ourselves. We are not the direct employer. We are indirect employer, of course, through our suppliers who are independent business organizations. And then, of course, social dialogue for us is the key how you can work towards well-functioning industrial relations. But you also need to have a legal framework around the industrial relations, as you said, Sofia, about creating the enabling environment for freedom of association, the right for collective bargaining, and hopefully also collective bargaining agreement. If that then is a bipartisan discussion in a factory between the employers and the employees, or if it is on an industry level between employers' organization and employee organization, or if it is on government level in a minimum wage discussion, for example, between government, employers and employees. That is where you can find the need to have the social dialogue. And for us, it's also a business interest in it. We need stable and predictable purchasing markets where we can plan with our suppliers for production for 2 years or 3 years to have a steady flow of goods coming to our shops. We cannot jump between each market every year. We need to be in those countries, work closely with suppliers, industry organizations, and with governments, be able to work for well-functioning industrial relations. And the ILO, we have a partnership agreement with the ILO, where we are doing some industrial relation projects in Cambodia, in Bangladesh. The Global Deal project is called in Bangladesh. We are doing it in Myanmar and Ethiopia. And the very basic core is to create a social dialogue on the factory level. And there you have to start with awareness raising about rights and obligations, both for employers and employees. Then you can start to build the structures for the social dialogue, which then will lead to peaceful conflict resolution and collective bargaining. So that's on the enterprise level, and the same goes for the industry level to create the environment for the social partners for the possibility to the industry-wide collective bargaining agreement, which we are hopefully reaching now in Cambodia through the ACT group, which is 18 European brands who has an MOU together with Industry All, and we are working for the enabling environment for a CBA now in Cambodia. We are looking into Myanmar, we are looking into Bangladesh, and meaning if now Cambodia reaches a CBA, that will mean it will be a competition neutral for all suppliers. Of course, maybe somebody will cheat, but at least we know the wage level for the coming years, and we will also have a peaceful labor market in the country, which then we can also commit ourselves to our suppliers for certain volumes, etc., for the coming years.
No, it's good to hear now from the three companies why, from a business perspective, it's important with social dialogue, not just as a social responsibility, but actually good for business as well. Going to the unions, we have Jonas, who is the vice chair of the board of Union to Union, but also the president of the Swedish Union of Journalists. Maybe, Jonas, you can tell us a little bit. Most of you know probably what Union to Union is, but maybe if you can tell us a little bit on how Union to Union works, and also some examples on how we then can work to strengthen trade unions in the countries with, you were mentioning Bangladesh, Cambodia and others, where the organization and the trade union density is very low sometimes, and the capacity for the trade unions to engage in social dialogue also varies. So can you tell us a little bit about union to unions and the union perspective on these issues?
Yeah, and keep it short,
Yes,
assume.
please.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Sofia, and thank you all members of this distinguished panel for all your presentations. It was very inspiring to hear from all of you. First of all, a bit shorter presentation of the Union to Union. This organization that has been founded a couple of years ago was founded by the Free Federation of the Swedish different kind of unions. You have the academic unions, you have the blue-collar working unions, and you have the white-collar working unions, and they together formed the Union to Union. And the reason to be for Union to Union is, of course, to in the aim of solidarity, strengthen our colleagues around the world in their ambitions to be stronger unions with the goals to be able to participate in the discussion in a society built on the social dialogue, as we are speaking about it right now. And the work of the Union to Union is constructed in a, I should say, quite simple way in that perspective, that all the member unions inside the federations have their different types of projects around in the world that we have pinpointed and that we found most valuable to give some sort of aid to be able to help the colleagues in these special places to organize better, or otherwise there could be other challenges as well. But if you've ever been working in a trade union, you know that everything starts and ends with the grade of organization, of course. But it's also very important to remind who's financing these projects, and the Union to Union is basically financed by the Swedish government, which is, I think it's very important to mention this as we speak about three parts involved in building the social dialogue. I don't think I should mention particular projects right now, because there will be a debate why I mention those and not those, because we have so many. I would try to present it perhaps in an overlooking structure perspective instead, because we have the representatives here talk about a lot of key issues about to build stronger societies and that build on wealth and prosperity, but I would say it's very. I would like to say that it's of much great importance to remind that social dialogue, in a way, is built on friction, which we seldom talk about, because, as you mentioned here at the last presentation, we like to talk about peaceful solutions. And so, and of course, we want to see peaceful solutions in a society that's built on wealth and hope for the future. But in the end, we must remind ourselves that some sort of friction is needed to get the social dialogue. And we have to talk about the different incentives in this perspective. A trade union has one incentive, a global company has another incentive, a government has a third incentive, and you have to combine them, and you have to accept the first incentive, that is the reasons to be for these kind of parts. But then in the end, the major question is to make all these three parts aim for something different and besides their own original incentives, and that is the purpose with the social dialogue, because you have to combine the fact that if you're a company that you first of all wants to make profit, of course, it's the reason to be for a company. If you're a trade union, you want to make sure that your members have better terms. That's the incentive for your reason to be. And if you're a government, you could have different incentives based on what kind of government you're running, of course, that's a discussion in itself, but in the end you have to combine it to make sure that all these parts are working together to create a better society with the same aim, without neglecting the fact that the different incentives has to be respected in that perspective. I think I stopped there.
No, that's a very good, important point. Even though there are different incentives, there's still this common goal of creating long-term sustainable societies. And in that regard, we have the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development, which was agreed among all member countries of the UN in 2015. And one of the goals there is particularly focusing on creating decent work and inclusive growth. And here there has been a lot of discussion recently about the role of social dialogue in reaching that goal. And the Global Deal, which was mentioned in the beginning and also in several of the presentations, is one such platform of gathering stakeholders. And it's quite remarkable in France on how different stakeholders has come together. When I started to work on the Global Deal, I asked the head of the World or the International Trade Union Federation about what are the businesses that are doing the best in social dialogue, which are the good examples. And all of them were almost French companies. And being a Swede, what we see in the news are the strikes in France and all the conflicts on the labor market. So that took me some time to kind of get a head around that. But now when we have the coordinator of the French Global Deal platform, could you tell us a little bit about where you think, why it's such a big interest of the French companies in Global Deal and in social dialogue issues in particular, and also how you work in France? I think I was in one of the gatherings you had, and there is one representative of a company whose title is actually Director of Social Dialogue. I think that was quite fun in itself. But please tell us a little bit about how you work in France and why you think the French companies are engaged in this platform.
Thank you, Sofia, for this challenging question, because I'm not sure I will be able to answer. No, I think building up what you say, Jonas, for us, social dialogue is not something easy. It's a challenging topic, and maybe that's why we want. It's not easy in France because of cultural things and history, whatever. But we had to work a lot on that. Really, because it's a challenging issue, and we know that there is no long-term future for our company if we don't tackle this. And we are working, I think, quite hard in France to improve things. It's not easy. You have to understand that France is more a Latin country, so you have the façade, the Commedia dell'arte, the French Commedia dell'arte, but you have also behind the scenes where people are really working concretely. So sometimes don't look too much at television, you maybe look what's going on. But we have been working on that because this is a very challenging issue for our company, and some people are fighting all the time, but we take the social dialogue as an opportunity. And I have a presentation I made because we are changing CEO, and we had a meeting 2 weeks ago with a new CEO. And I say, what is our ambition? Ambition social dialogue is having a constructive, challenging model. Social dialogue is challenging. It has to be constructive. But it's part of the model. It's part of the company. It's inside the company, not outside. And so we have, that's probably why we are today 18 big global company in France joining the social dialogue, joining Global Deal initiative, and we have started to work together. We had, Sofia was there, the launch was made in the Labour Ministry after Mr. Macron was there in November last year, and he signed the Global Deal initiative, the French president. Then he came back to France, and the Labour Ministry, who was HR in a previous life, so she knows these kind of topics, wanted to make something real strong, but not only for political reason, of course there is always politics in that, but because she was, our labor ministry was in HR for many years, and she knew, like, what I'm talking about, that challenging social dialogue is not easy, but this is key to make the company improving for a strong future.
Yeah, and I think what you do is basically in this platform also sharing experiences between different companies and what can we learn from each other, what are working and what's not. And I think that is also because it's not easy.
Maybe I can say a comment. Yes, very interesting because, you know, the global company, we invest in new countries, but usually we don't know nothing about the countries. You arrive in a new country, we arrived in Brazil, for instance, when I was in automobile industry. We arrived in Brazil. I was in Renault, the cars. We arrived in Brazil. We didn't know anything, so we made a lot of mistakes because we didn't know. And why? The best way to share practices is start to talk with the company of your country because we have the same cultural background. So it's very easy to exchange. Hey, you've been to Brazil. I want to go there next year. How does it work? And for us, the global deal was a unique opportunity to work together, to start to work together between the company of the same country, to talk about the way we are working on social dialogue in so many, as you said, Sofia, the world is so diverse. It's impossible to know everything in all situations. So really, the cooperation created between the business of France through the Global Deal initiative is very useful to develop our operation all over the world.
I think it's very interesting to hear of this knowledgeable panel. I also want to give the opportunity to you, the distinguished audience, to ask some questions to these panelists about either from a company perspective, countries, or something else. So please, if you raise your hand, there will be a mic here also going around. So maybe in the front we have two other global deal countries, Tunisia and Bangladesh. So I don't know whether you have a comment on your engagement in this. For example, Tunisia has used social dialogue as a tool also in their democratic transition and even got the Nobel Peace Prize for that. So I don't know, Ambassador, do you want to take the opportunity?
Thank you, Sofia, for that. Thank you for this event. Thank you, gentlemen, and madam.
I don't think it's switched on.
Doesn't work?
Thank you. Thank you. Better.
It doesn't have a...
So again, thank you, Sofia, and madam and gentlemen, for your inputs. Just to make it short, because it's quite a long story, even though it's quite recent. Social dialogue came to Tunisia as a spontaneous response to what we may call a political crisis in the aftermath of the change of regime in 2011, and that happened during the years 2013, 2014. Then the social dialogue was a response to that crisis, and hadn't it been for that process which started between the union and the main business union, and of course the human rights association or organization in Tunisia, and then that ended up in saving Tunisia from falling into a sort of internal conflict, and so from that time onwards, then things evolved on that same path. So anything that has been decided, or especially in the democratization process, was a fruit of dialogue between the different partners. And at that stage, there was not even any sort of a structure which was in charge of managing the social dialogue. It's only recently that we got a national council for social dialogue with 105 members on it, and it's more of an arena or a forum for the different partners to discuss, because otherwise we are resorting to dialogue spontaneously, and every time there is some sort of beat on social issues like wages mainly because they are always very high on the agenda, especially for us, where we are now at the point of, we have gone far enough in the democratization process. Now it's the socio-economic transition which is of utmost importance, so that we can keep up, especially with the democratization process. So, just to join you, Ambassador, on the fact that every country has its specificities, we are being told that Tunisia is a model, and that model has to be exported to other MENA region countries and so on. Yes, it is. We can say it's a success story. Yes. And we are proud of it. And the Nobel Prize was really a worldwide recognition of the importance of what happened in Tunisia and its impact. But as far as being a model to be emulated in other countries, we are not really fond of that, because we may share our experience. Yes, it's willing. We do it willingly, and this is why we are always there, Sofia, and you know. But then the same model cannot be emulated everywhere. Every country has to adapt its social dialogue process, and there has to be social dialogue, but every country has to find its own arrangements for that.
Well, thank you, Ambassador. And I think that's a very important point, that there is not a one-size-fits-all, but it's important to work together, and what works in those different countries may look different. But I'll open up for questions or comments from the floor. Göran, I see your hand in the back.
It's on, yeah. Thank you, Sofia. My name is Göran Trogen. I've been taking part in social dialogue in Sweden for many, many years, together with Sofia, among others. And now to the question about how to help other stakeholders and other countries to reinforce their dialogue. There are many stakeholders, impressive amount of stakeholders you have put together, Sofia, over a couple of years, some here present, and apparently these stakeholders, you don't need not much of support in your dialogue. You're very, very successful, but others are not, and other countries need support. And how can the global deal, or I'm coming to that, union to union, help in that way? Sweden, we are experienced in social dialogue. We have been doing that some more years than Uruguay, and we are experienced not in our own dialogue, but also in setting up projects about social dialogue funded by SIDA or European Union. And I'm talking about real social dialogue projects. Let's call them labor market dialogue projects that include all the parties in a selected country. And not only the trade unions, but government and employer organizations. And it is important to have the employer organizations on board. Without employer organizations in the country, there cannot be any social dialogue, at least not at the national level. And then to my proposal, Sofia. You have brought with you to union all these stakeholders. And you know we are experienced in Sweden, and you know that we have networks in Sweden with experts of social dialogue, mostly relatively newly retired employer delegates, experts, trade union and government experts that could do a job in this sense. It's not necessary to bring on board for projects the Swedish employer organizations. They are a bit reluctant to this kind of business, but we can provide Swedish employers representatives that are very experienced on this as trade union also representatives. So my proposal is simply, why not continue now in your new capacity in union to union to be active on this this side to create real labor market projects with support from, of course, SIDA or anyone else.
Thank you, Göran, for the questions and also the proposal. If we have the time for, if you can be very brief, I see a lady there in the back, and then if you can be brief, and then I'll hand over for comments from the panelists after a few more questions.
Thank you very much. My name is Åsa Smedler. I'm on the board of the Swedish Women's Lobby, so I'm very interested in women's issues, empowerment of women. Glad to hear that we have a representative from H&M, because many of your producers have a very imbalanced strength between women and men in the labor market. And there are examples, I don't have to repeat them, but I would like you to address constructively what are the differences that you see with the global deal when it comes to unorganized women in very difficult positions, not being able to have a bargaining power.
Thank you. I think two more questions. The gentleman in the white shirt, and then we have one here as well. And then I'll hand over to the panel.
Hello, I'm Henrik Riby from SIDA, Development Agency. We have some ongoing projects with H&M, with Scania and Union to Union. We're very glad for those. But we do have a challenge when we work with the social dialogue in countries, and that is connecting to Göran's questions, where there are no real strong unions, or they're weak of different things. Do you have any ideas on how to tackle this? Because we need to go on with the social dialogue, even though the environment is not really nice to it. Yeah.
Very important question. And then here, the last question.
I can add on to that. My name is Roger Hellhag from Rud Pedersen Public Affairs, a consultancy. We have seen some news reports about Prime Minister Stefan Löfven wrapping up and handing over Global Deal. So my question is simply, who will be at global level, the drivers and promoters of social dialogue from now on? Of course, we know it's a tough international climate, so I would find that very essential that some, or rather a coalition, take that work further. Thanks.
Good. So I think we have a set of very good questions. So maybe I'll just turn the panelists for comments and on all these questions, what you think. I think the gender perspective on how you can use social dialogue also as a mean to improve gender equality, but also from a representational point of view. And how do we work to strengthen unions? Because I think that is one of the obstacles for engaging in true social dialogue, maybe also employer organizations' capacity to a certain extent. But I hand over to the panelists. I'll start with Ambassador Wins, and then Lars-Åke after that, and towards you.
Well, thank you. I think those are very interesting questions. Just as a reflection, I would say that I will address the question on how can we help others and benefit from the social dialogue experience. And as my colleague, the Ambassador of Tunisia, said, each country is different and has a very different situation, and no model can be applied to all realities. But we can all learn from each other's experiences. And my impression is, since I've been here in Sweden for 3 years now, and my impression is that there is a more a strong culture of negotiation first. I can say that in Uruguay, the culture is first you go to strike, and as a negotiation tool. That has changed over the last years because workers have realized that this is not the most efficient way to achieve your objectives. And I think the opportunity it would be to change this logic from conflict to cooperation in the workers' unions, it would be a great contribution. Maybe my initial presentation was too optimistic. There are many challenges in Uruguay too, and I think one of them is precisely how to learn that instead of going to a striking measure first, this negotiation that now has a strong legal framework and is mandatory, and the government has to call for the wage negotiations, means that it's an opportunity for also workers to involve in that this dialogue benefits everyone, and how to plan for a strategy on how to design the future of the economy. And this is also related to SDGs. We have called in 2015 a national dialogue on SDGs implementation that has involved civil society, academia, private sector, and we presented this to the last General Assembly, a progress report. And there were created 9 dialogue tables on SDGs implementation, because of course we realized that SDGs cannot be implemented only by a decision of the government. But going back to how we can benefit, I think that the workers' unions in Uruguay still have a design that was made in an industrial period, and they need to address other realities of the structure of the economy nowadays, and this logic would be again going from the first conflict would be to improve how to learn and give the tools to negotiate and also cooperation. And another thing is that the workers' unions have a strong legal profile. And I do insist on that the jobs of the future require that also workers' unions understand what are the specificities of the jobs that are made the economy nowadays and will make it in the future. So.
Thank you. Now we're turning a little bit short on time, but I will start with Lars-Åke, if you can just say maybe something very briefly on the gender, and then I'll hand over to Sofia, and then Jonas, and then Jean-Christophe to end. So just 1 minute each or so.
Yes,
Easy to answer the gender issue in 1 minute. Sorry about that. We'll come back to you afterwards.
No, maybe it's not easy, but I think it's very important, and I fully agree that you're raising a highly relevant question here. Our supply chain represents, I think, about 1.5 million workers, and probably 95% are women, right? You were asking for concrete examples, so I can mention a couple here. One is in Cambodia, where we had an ILO project for 3 years. We had a lot of efforts in that project to promote female representation into the factory trade unions. We should remember that in Cambodia, about 83% of our supply chain is unionized. So there is a lot of representation from the unions in the factories, but the women are underrepresented. And we had ILO had some assistance from IF Metal during these years for the flowing gender experts to help them to create training material, etc., to empower more women in the factories to be able to also sit in the local trade union representation in the factory. Another one is Better Work, which is a flagship program within the ILO designed for the garment industry. There's a super interesting project going on to promote women to be supervisors, line supervisors. It has been piloted already in Bangladesh, shows very good results, increased productivity, etc. So that is something that we're definitely looking into now and for the future.
Thank you. Sofia, final words for you on the questions, or?
Yeah, just wanting to get back to the how can we help, and I think one important task for the Global Deal-plattform and the partners is to share good examples and for the platform to spread them, because from my understanding, if you don't see the advantages, of course it's going to be much more difficult to create change. If, on the other hand, I really understand there are success examples due to social dialogue, we maybe can help that way as well.
Very important. And Jonas, maybe on how union to union and we, the Swedish union, can work to strengthen.
Yeah, the problem with weak unions, there were very relevant questions raised here. And of course, as being a representative for the trade union movement in Sweden, of course, we believe that a strong society is built on a functional trade union movement all around the world. But having said that, of course, as I mentioned before, it's all about incentives. If you have a structure inside your country where you have governments and companies who doesn't believe that weak unions are a problem, that it is an asset for the country, then it perhaps will be a bit harder to organize in those countries, and then you have to work with the incentives for those parts. But on the other hand, it's also very important to remind that when we work in projects, or whenever you're outside in the world talking about the Swedish model, it's always good to be a bit humble, because no one wants to hear about how good things work in Sweden, because you have to consider how things work in the country where you are talking right at the moment. And if you have a project in some part of the world, you have to be very sincere to take in how things work in that country and behave out of that analysis. So I think that is very important to remind us all about, and I think that is the way that we work inside Union to Union. With that perspective, perhaps the best incentives for those governments or those companies around the world that doesn't see the benefits of strong unions, perhaps they don't want to hear it from another trade union movement, but from other parts like governments or companies like those represented here. So.
Good point. So Jean-Christophe, our French guest here, you can have the final words, and then I'll comment on the global deal issues a little bit from my old hat.
Yes, thank you, Sofia. I take just one point. How can we do work to reinforce the role of employer representative? And I think the interest of the business is to reinforce their role by developing the people. We can develop the people. We develop our people. We have to develop, I think, and support the employee representative. How? To be concrete. First, many of them are workers all over the world, and it's very difficult to work together unless they can speak together. So first, teach them English. So, for instance, the EWC in Solvay plus the Global Forum people, they spend 1 week in UK in a training center to learn English. Just 1 week. It's very good for English, but also very good for team building of them. Second, in some countries, union is very different from here. For instance, China. In China, the union, they are very dependent of the Communist Party. We know that, it's clear. But we think that in the future, they will get a role more like the way we want, which is a challenging role. Today, they are not challenging at all. They are very nice people. They want harmony. The Chinese leaders, they say, we want harmony. Okay, no problem. But as you said, harmony is not
they have different kinds of incentives.
It's the end of the day, but when you start, there is no harmony. Where are the problems? Are they under the table? Please help us to put the problem on the table. So we have a Chinese chairman of union seminar once a year. I was there 2 weeks ago, and we work with them really to train them. What do you listen? Be our eyes, be our ears, and then bring the problem on the table. After that, the local processes can be different in some country negotiation, in some other consultation, but at least raise the point. Raise the point. Third example, the US. United States, you have union people and non-unionized people. There is a big gap between these two worlds. And then at the Global Forum in Solvay, we have a guy from the unions, and the manager in the US, they told me, yes, but the rest of the people, who represent them? And we said, we are going to add another seat. We will have 1 seat for unionized people at our Global Forum, and then we are going to create a second seat for the white collar. They are not unionized, but they have the right to speak up. Again, so we are going to organize a big election next year to fill this second seat. So it's not union, it's something different. But what is important is not union or non-union. What is important is to have the employees who can speak up, they have a voice in front of the management who can express themselves the issues.
Yeah, thank you. And then on very brief on the global deal, which now will be handed or coordinated by OECD in cooperation with ILO. So I think that will have the basis to strengthen the work and create this platform, which I hear here today that there is a benefit from the company, from the government side, and from the unions to have this platform to share experiences and see how we can enhance social dialogue. So I want to thank the panelists for great interventions and also to all of you for listening. And I hope to continue the discussion going forward. So thank you to all.
Very good.